Chapter 22 of the Book of Enoch has one word in it that every major English translator handled differently. R.H. Charles, in 1906, called it a place. Michael Knibb, in 1978, called it a chamber. Ephraim Isaac, working from the oldest surviving Ge'ez manuscript in 1983, translated it as a requirement for holding. 3 scholars, 3 different answers, and the reason none of them agreed is the same reason this passage gets summarized instead of read. Because Charles and Knibb were describing a location. Isaac was describing a condition. And the difference between those 2 readings is the difference between a place you go when you die and a threshold you either qualify for or you don't. The oldest version of that chapter, the one Isaac was working from, housed in the Ethiopian manuscript tradition at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, doesn't open with a description of chambers. It opens with a list, 8 items, written in the same plain procedural language Enoch uses when he's describing a mountain or a river or a prison carved out of stone. No poetry, no symbol. A list of what the soul must carry to be received. I'm Daniel Voss, and you're watching The Black Parchment. I track what the original manuscripts say and what the translations decided to change. Today, I'm covering all 8. Before I do, the system these 8 requirements are built on is the same calendar and gate structure Enoch describes in chapters 72 through 82. I put together a full reading built on that system. You put in your birthday, and it tells you which gate you were born under, which angel governs it, and what the tradition connects to that date. Now available in a bundle, the link is in the description, or you can scan the QR code on screen. Moving on. First, some real context, because it matters before we go further. Most people encounter chapter 22 through a summary. 4 chambers inside a hollow mountain, souls sorted by category, the righteous separated from the wicked. That summary is accurate. The chapter exists, the chambers are real. James VanderKam at Notre Dame, one of the leading scholars on the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Enoch corpus, describes chapter 22 as the most developed afterlife geography in any Jewish text written before the Common Era. And not because it describes heaven, because it describes a waiting structure. The souls in chapter 22 are not in heaven. They are in a holding location beneath the earth, waiting for a final judgment that hasn't happened yet at the time Enoch visits. What almost every English translation drops is the preamble. The Ethiopian Ge'ez version contains 4 lines before the chamber description that function as conditions. Not a description of what the chambers look like, but a list of what the soul must carry to enter them at all. The Ge'ez word at the center of this preamble is te'ezaz, which carries the specific meaning of requirement placed on a receiver, like a condition of admittance. Charles didn't translate it that way. The framework didn't fit what he was building. Knibb moved past it. Isaac footnoted the discrepancy and left it there, which in academic writing is the equivalent of marking a door and hoping someone opens it. Here's what's behind it. The first requirement is a recorded testimony. The soul must arrive carrying a voice that was already received. Enoch uses the Ge'ez word tzot, and this is one of those words where the translation decisions reveal how much was at stake. Tzot means voice. It also means a statement submitted as evidence, not a prayer offered in hope, not a confession made at death, a statement made during life, heard by something with the authority to receive it and logged. Charles's English translation of chapter 22 verse 7 says the voice of Abel was crying out on behalf of the righteous souls. The Ge'ez construction is different. The text says the testimonies of the righteous had been received before their arrival. Past tense, before arrival. Already in the record. That is not how most religious traditions frame divine judgment. The standard model: you live your life, you die, you stand before something and make your case, involves a soul arriving and speaking. Enoch doesn't describe a trial at the gate. He describes a records check. The soul either submitted its testimony during life, in a form the system recognizes, and the word used implies something witnessed and acknowledged, not something internal and private. Or it arrives at the gate with nothing on file, and the gate doesn't hold sessions. It checks records. What counts as valid testimony is left open. What is not left open is the timing. The record closes at death. There's no supplemental filing afterward. Let me know what you make of that in the comments. I'm genuinely curious whether anyone from a religious background finds a parallel. Testimony submitted before the fact, not at the end. The second requirement is tied to the astronomical book, chapters 72 through 82, which is the section of Enoch that most people skip because it reads like a technical manual. That's exactly what it is. 12 gates, the sun enters and exits through them on a precise schedule. The moon uses the same gates on a different schedule. The 364-day calendar Enoch describes is organized around this gate sequence, and it is mathematically unusual. Exactly 52 weeks, no correction factor, no drift. Our current calendar requires a leap year every 4 years to stay calibrated. Enoch's calendar doesn't require adjustment. It is self-contained. The Ge'ez version adds something the standard translations don't carry: the assignment of souls to gates at birth. Not birth signs in an astrological sense, gates in an architectural and administrative sense. The gate you were born under is where your soul is registered in the system. And the requirement isn't only that you were born under a gate. The requirement is that your gate remained uncontaminated. When the Watchers descended and transmitted the forbidden arts, one of the things they disrupted was the calendar itself. Chapter 80 describes the consequences. The lights in the sky go wrong, the seasons shift, the sequence breaks. Souls born under gates that were thrown off by that disruption arrive at the threshold with a gate designation that no longer matches the gate on record. Enoch treats this as an administrative problem. He writes about it the way you'd write about a database with corrupted entries. The information doesn't match. The entry is flagged. The soul cannot be received. What makes this uncomfortable, and it should make you uncomfortable, is that the disruption wasn't the soul's fault. You didn't corrupt your gate. The Watchers did. The text acknowledges this without apology. It does not change the outcome. How does a system this precise break down in a way that penalizes the uninvolved? That's a real question the text raises and doesn't answer. Drop it in the comments if you have a framework for it. The third requirement is the one the translation committees handled most carefully, and the care shows. Chapter 69 lists the 18 forbidden teachings the Watchers transmitted to humanity: sword making, root cutting, sorcery, the use of metals against human flesh. That list is in every major English version. What the Ge'ez version contains that the English doesn't is a phrase attached to the illumination teaching, the one about fire and artificial light, that specifies which kind of illumination the restriction targets. The phrase is meladze yetfeka, light that is not owed to you, light taken rather than given. And the preamble to chapter 22 names the excess of this as one of the conditions a soul must not carry. The logic the text builds is straightforward. Every soul has a natural luminosity. Enoch describes this in chapter 39. The righteous are bright, and their brightness comes from within. The Watchers taught humanity how to manufacture luminosity artificially, through specific configurations of flame, reflective materials, and fire arranged to amplify. A soul that relied on manufactured brightness rather than its natural light arrives at the gate with a glow that doesn't match its record. Bright in the wrong places, dim where it matters. The fragment catalogue from Qumran Cave, the Enoch fragments designated 4Q201 through 4Q12, held now at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, includes within 4Q12 what appears to be a marginal annotation written in a different hand than the main text. The annotation is in Aramaic, and it specifies the borrowed light category more narrowly. Illumination used to make one thing appear as another. Light arranged to deceive. That annotation was identified in fragment photographs circulated in the 1980s before the full scholarly publication reached the academic press. It hasn't been translated into any major English edition of the Enoch text. The photographs were taken, the fragment is catalogued, the annotation is there. The fourth requirement is numerical, and it surfaces one of the most theologically uncomfortable distinctions in the entire chapter. The 364-day calendar assigns each soul a melaect, a task duration, not a lifespan. Enoch is deliberate about the distinction. Lifespan is how long you lived. Task duration is the commission period in which something specific was supposed to happen. The task can be completed before the lifespan ends. The lifespan can end before the task is complete. These are separate quantities. The distinction matters because of what it does to the chamber assignments. The standard explanation for why chapter 22 separates souls into different chambers is righteousness versus wickedness. VanderKam flags that reading as inaccurate in his 1995 commentary and calls the actual distinction theologically uncomfortable. A careful way of saying it implies something most readers don't want to follow to its conclusion, because the first and second chambers don't divide righteous from wicked. They divide completed from incomplete. The souls in the second chamber are described in the Ge'ez with the word Tzedek, righteous but unfinished. The task duration ran out before the task was done, and the second chamber holds them apart from the first, waiting for a final accounting that the text says will address the completion question at some future point, whether that accounting can result in retroactive completion. The text doesn't say. What it says is that the two categories of righteous souls are not in the same place and do not have the same standing. Arriving righteous is not sufficient. Arriving righteous and complete is what the first chamber requires. The fifth requirement is where the translation discrepancy is most visible. In Michael Knibb's Oxford translation of chapter 72, the angels assigned to the 12 gates are identified by function only. The one who governs the east gate, the one who governs the north gate, no names. Because Knibb's translation has been widely cited for decades, most secondary sources treat this anonymity as a feature of the original text, as if Enoch intentionally left the gate operators unnamed. The Ge'ez manuscript does not leave them unnamed. In the Ethiopian version, the gate operators are named, not with the familiar archangel names from chapter 20, not Michael, not Gabriel, not Raphael. A second tier of names that appear only in the astronomical passages. Bariel at the eastern gate, Samuel at the southern, Kafziel at the northern, 12 names for 12 gates. And in the preamble to chapter 22, the text says plainly that the soul is expected to know the name of the angel assigned to its gate. The Ge'ez word used is yeyafaker, to know in the sense of having acquainted yourself with. Not memorized under pressure, acquainted. The way you know the name of someone you sought out, rather than someone who was pushed in front of you. Enoch frames this as a test of whether the person ever sought the knowledge they were entitled to seek. The knowledge was available. The gate was assigned. The angel's name was part of the record. A soul that never looked. The text treats that as a decision. And decisions have consequences at the gate. Which translation are you more inclined to trust here? Knibb's unnamed operators or the named list in the Ge'ez? Tell me in the comments. I'm interested in where people land on this one. The sixth requirement is the most legally structured of the 8. After the list of 18 forbidden teachings in chapter 69, the Ge'ez version contains 3 lines that describe the legal status of souls who practice those teachings, not souls who received the knowledge passively who practiced it. And the key word is habte, debt. A soul that practiced any of the 18 carries a debt corresponding to the harm caused by that practice. Here is where the text departs from most religious frameworks. The debt must be paid during life, not forgiven at death, not cleared at the gate, paid during life through what the Ge'ez calls terfa, restitution made to the person actually harmed by the practice, a specific legal mechanism. The person harmed must receive the restitution. The restitution must happen while both parties are alive. If the debt remains unpaid at death, it goes with the soul to the gate. And a soul carrying an uncleared watcher debt cannot enter the first chamber, regardless of what else it carries. This is not a moral framework built around grace. It's a ledger. 18 categories of obligation. One mechanism for clearing each. A deadline of death. What makes it disturbing isn't the ethical logic. That's fairly intuitive. What makes it disturbing is that there's no alternative path. No confession that substitutes for restitution. No mercy clause that steps in when the affected party dies before settlement can happen. The ledger is the ledger. It either clears or it doesn't. The 7th requirement has the clearest connection to what most people recognize as the traditional archangel system. Chapter 20 names 7 archangels and their domains. Uriel, the world of angels and the chaos of the stars. Raphael, the spirits of men. Raguel, vengeance on the luminaries. Michael, the best of humanity. Saraquel, human spirits who sin. Gabriel, paradise, the serpents, the cherubim. Remiel, those who rise. That list is in every major translation. It's real and it has been verified against the Qumran fragments multiple times. What follows that list in the Ge'ez version is an assignment. Each archangel is named as a witness at the threshold, not a judge, not an advocate, a witness in the precise legal sense. Each of the 7 is responsible for recognizing specific categories of souls at the gate, and the word the text uses for that recognition is en berto, to identify as known, to confirm that what has arrived is something the witness has encountered before. The requirement is that the soul must be recognized by at least one of the 7. What happens to a soul that isn't recognized? The Ge'ez says, yet melez, returned, not condemned, not sentenced, not assigned to punishment, returned. To where the text doesn't specify. It just says, returned. That clause is the one nobody addresses directly, because it creates a third category that doesn't fit the binary most people are working with. A soul can clear every other requirement and still arrive unrecognized. And an unrecognized soul is returned, not held, not retried, returned. Drop your reading of the return clause in the comments. I want to know how people are processing that. The eighth requirement is the one that holds the whole system together, and it's rooted in a passage that most people treat as a birth narrative. Chapters 106 and 197 describe the birth of Noah. Lamech's son arrives luminous, bright eyes, face like lightning, the infant glowing in the room. Lamech is frightened. He sends his father Methuselah to find Enoch at the ends of the earth and ask whether this child is genuinely human or whether the watchers fathered him. Enoch's answer, delivered from across an impossible distance, is this: the child's light is not watcher-derived. It comes from what the Ge'ez calls the first breath, the original act of human animation, the moment the first being was given life. And that thread of original light, Enoch says, has been transmitted through every genuinely human soul since. The preamble to chapter 22 identifies this thread as a requirement, not the presence of luminosity, the intactness of the thread. A soul with a severed thread cannot be received at the gate, regardless of everything else it carries. The text gives 3 conditions under which the thread severs. The first is sustained practice of the forbidden arts, to a degree that permanently substitutes borrowed light for the original, not a single act, but a habitual replacement that the soul no longer registers as replacement. The second is what the Ge'ez calls tesfa yemai meta, hope placed in death as a release, not hope beyond death, hope in death itself, a soul that oriented toward dying as an exit rather than as a passage through the gate has, by that orientation, already redefined what the gate is. The thread severs because the soul stopped believing the threshold existed. The third condition is active denial of the watcher's existence used as a justification for practicing the forbidden arts, not honest skepticism. The text is careful about this. Strategic denial, using the disbelief as a license. Of the 3, the second is the one I keep returning to, because what Enoch describes is something any person in genuine crisis might experience. And he wrote this in the 2nd century BC during the Maccabean period, when Jewish communities were being systematically forced to choose between apostasy and death, mass killing, prolonged persecution, the kind of sustained historical violence that makes despair not a weakness, but an entirely rational response. The man who wrote this chapter knew who was going to read it. He knew what some of them were going through. He documented the requirement anyway. He didn't soften it. He didn't add a mercy clause for impossible circumstances. He wrote down a condition that would have applied to people he probably knew and loved, and he left it in the text exactly as he found it, or as it was given to him. That's either one of the most ruthless things a writer has ever done, or one of the most honest. There are 2 honest ways to sit with what I just walked through. The first is that this is sophisticated religious law developed by Jewish thinkers in the 2nd century BC, brilliant, internally coherent, and consistent with everything we know about Second Temple legal culture. The 8 requirements map cleanly onto legal structures any reader of that period would have recognized. Testimony, registration, completed contracts, cleared debts, recognized witnesses. Nothing here is foreign to a tradition built around Leviticus and Deuteronomy. This is covenant theology applied to the afterlife by people who thought in covenant terms. Human invention. Disciplined, rigorous human invention. That reading is defensible. Most scholars are comfortable in it. The second reading is the one that makes the first harder to hold than it should be. The calendar that doesn't drift. The gate system that maps to specific birth dates with no correction factor needed. The distinction between righteous and complete and righteous and incomplete. The one VanderKam flagged as theologically uncomfortable and then stepped carefully around. The returned clause that creates a third category no standard religious framework has room for. The thread that severs under conditions Enoch identified 2,200 years ago with more precision than most modern systems can match. Legal frameworks don't achieve this level of specificity by accident. They achieve it when someone has seen the cases. I'm Daniel Voss, the Black Parchment. Most people who start watching content like this eventually settle into the first explanation because it's cleaner. If you're still here, subscribe. You already know which side of that line you're on. The fragment from Qumran Cave 4 that contains the preamble to chapter 22 is catalogued at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. It's behind glass. You can go see it. It's not going anywhere.